So Krishnaji began his work in 1929. In the month of August, he gave a series of talks at Holland, and he began by saying that his only concern was to set man absolutely and unconditionally free. So that word unconditionally free, that was not properly understood, because usually by conditions we mean that certain things which if the person agrees, then we say that if this then that. So that is the sense in which we use the word conditions. That means if you submit a proposal to someone, then there are conditions mentioned there, that under these conditions then they will work, or if these conditions are not fulfilled, then they will not work, and so on. So in that sense the word condition was used, and even in translating his works, so it was mostly translated in that sense. But unconditionally free, when Krishnaji started talking about human conditioning and those things, then at that time the meaning of that word unconditionally free started unfolding. So I think how this word unconditioned or unconditioning or conditioning, now it has to be looked at on the basis of our notion of freedom, because human beings, they say they love freedom. Everybody wants freedom, and we have defined freedom in various ways, like political freedom, economical freedom, social freedom, and even in the job as per his position or status, freedom according to that, freedom to do what I want to do, freedom to live whatever kind of life I want to live, and so on. So freedom is used in many different ways. But what is the basis of this notion of freedom? Now, in a given situation, if there are various alternatives, and if you are left to yourself to choose your alternative, then you say that I am free to choose from these various alternatives whatever I want to choose. I am free to choose it. But if somebody else tells you that out of these, this is the one you have to choose, and he insists that you can choose only this, then you say that then I am not free. There is somebody else who is dictating what I should do, and therefore I am not free. So in that sense, we can say that our notion of freedom is based on choice. If we are free to choose, then we say that yes, we are free. But if somebody else is deciding our choice, then we don't feel that we are free. So it is based on the choice. Then if we inquire further, go into it, say we have made a choice and we feel that we are free. I have made it my choice and I am free. Nobody has dictated me the choice. But if I ask myself, what is the basis of my choice? Out of those various alternatives or possibilities, why did I choose this particular one? What is the basis? So, if one questions in that way, then the obvious answer is the basis is my background. Whatever knowledge base I have collected in me, the knowledge base or the database is not only the knowledge and information, but also my likes, dislikes, preferences, prejudices, my understanding, all those things. So all that together is my database. my background, and on that basis, that database decides what I will choose from those 10 or number of alternatives. So, given the database, the choice is fixed. Now, if the choice is fixed, then where is the freedom? Anybody who knows your database, he knows what choice you are going to make out of these different choices available. And therefore, as far as you are concerned, your choice is fixed because your database is fixed, and therefore there is really no freedom. And everybody is going to choose as per his background. This background is referred to as conditioning. Every human being is conditioned, and he makes his choices according to his conditioning. And he feels that if he is able to make choice as per his conditioning, then he feels free. And if he is not able to make it according to his conditioning, then he doesn't feel he is free. So then what is the notion of freedom? So for a human being, the notion of freedom is that to be free to live as per my conditioning. If I am free, if I am able to live as per my conditioning, then I feel free. If I am not able to live as per my conditioning, then I am not free. So if my conditioning is to believe in something, I have my own beliefs, I have my own faiths, I have my own views, I have my own conclusions, opinions, and if I am able to live as per that, then I feel free. If somebody says, no, this won't work, you can't have this kind of faith, you can't believe in this, and then start dictating, then I don't feel free. And so, our freedom is the freedom to live as per our conditioning. So that conditioning decides our field of existence, because within that conditioning we live our life. Within that conditioning we live our life. So the conditioning decides the field of our existence, decides the field of our life, and everything will be decided as per that conditioning. All our responses, all our thinking, whatever that we do, our responses, our reactions will come from that. And so outside of that field of conditioning, we have no existence, because we are not aware what is there outside this field of conditioning. Every human being is conditioned, and he has his own field of conditioning, and in that field he is living, surviving, doing everything, and then he says that he is alive, he is free. So that freedom is the freedom in a prison. So each human being has created his own prison in the form of this psychological conditioning, and then he is living in that prison. He is already living in that prison. So that's why that statement that nobody can put you psychologically in a prison, because you are already there. And within that prison, he is seeking the freedom. So if he feels that yes, within this prison, if I am able to live as per my conditioning, as per my choices and whatever it is, then I feel free. So that means his notion of freedom is also within that prison. So if a person is seeking freedom, he is seeking freedom within that prison. So he may say that that corner of the prison is better than this corner, so I want to be there, then I will feel more free. Or I want to decorate my prison in this way, then I will feel much better, and so on. So everything is being done in the prison with this assumption or notion that I am free, completely free. And then this field of conditioning is not fixed in the sense that, because if we investigate how this conditioning comes about, then through that investigation we will also come to understand that whether this field of conditioning, whether it is fixed, definite, or it is changing. So you see, every human being interacts with the environment. Now, first of all, when a new baby is born, is that child completely like a blank slate, absolutely not conditioned, or the child is already born as a conditioned human being? Now, obviously, we see that genetically the child inherits lots of things, and so those things we can say that it is the genetic conditioning. So child is already born with genetic conditioning. So in that genetic conditioning, even what kind of sicknesses or illnesses he will be going through in his life, what he will be susceptible to, all those things that is encoded in that in those genes, and therefore the child is already born as a conditioned human being. Then psychologically speaking, Krishnaji says that there is the unity of consciousness. That means each individual thinks that his consciousness is his personal field, it's separate, and each human being has his own separate consciousness, and it has nothing to do with the consciousness of other persons, and he can be just whatever he wants as per his consciousness, and it is separate. So if I feel angry, then my anger is separate from the other person's anger. My fear is separate from other person's fear, and so on. So in that way, the human beings consider or think that their consciousness is separate from the consciousness of other human beings or other living beings. But Krishnaji says that your consciousness is part of the totality of consciousness. So if you take the totality of the human consciousness, which is not just the sum total of individual consciousnesses, but it is even more than that. And so, if your consciousness is part of that totality of consciousness, and whatever is the content of your consciousness, it is the same as the content of the totality of consciousness, then what we can say is that whatever content you have drawn it from the totality of human consciousness. And therefore, psychologically also you are conditioned. So what we are saying is that when a new human being is born, is not only genetically conditioned, but psychologically also the content of his consciousness are drawn from the totality of human consciousness. And therefore psychologically also the child is already conditioned when it is born. So a human being right from birth is conditioned, and when that conditioned human being starts interacting with the environment initially is the mother, then the parents and other people in the family, then when he goes to the school, then his peers or teachers, and then after finishing his education, when he lives in the world at large, then there, whatever people he come in contact with and whatever situations he gets into. So all with that he is interacting, and through that interaction he is being further conditioned. So the cycle is, there is a situation, you face that situation. In facing that situation, you are creating an experience for you. That means you experience that situation. And out of that experience, you gather lot of knowledge, information. And that knowledge and information is stored in your brain as a memory. And from that memory, you respond. And the response of memory is thought. And with that thought, when you respond to a situation, that gives rise to the next event. Which means that suppose there is a provocative condition. So we have said that there is a condition or there is a situation. The situation is that somebody has provoked you. To that provocation, right, you go through that experience of provocation. You hear those words, they go into your memory, and there they are decoded or whatever it is, and you understand what he is saying to you. So from that memory, the thought comes, oh, he's saying this thing to me. And then with that thought, the corresponding action. The corresponding action is you say something in turn to that person. And so when you say something to that person in return, that gives rise to a new situation, a new event, because then in response to what you have said, that fellow will say again something, and so again the next experience, and again from that the knowledge, information, memory, and this cycle keeps on repeating. And with every repetition of this cycle of experience, there is an addition of knowledge into the memory. And therefore, that is how the conditioning builds up. And this knowledge is not just factual knowledge or information, but there is a lot of psychological content in it. Because when somebody has said something to you, it's not that just those words are recorded in the brain as a memory. But when he has said those things to you, then your psychological response, that emotion, that sensation, that also gets recorded in the memory. And so you have now a psychological memory of that event. Now, so when you respond, the whole of the memory responds. It's not just the informative memory. Even the psychological component also responds. So if the psychological component is of anger, then your response will contain that anger. So you will angrily respond to whatever that person has said. And then you will say that, oh, you are angry, and so on. So this way the conditioning builds up with every interaction, and not only the interaction with the outside, but interaction within oneself also, in the sense that there is already a large storehouse of memory in the brain, and you are thinking about it. You are recalling some incidences, you are thinking and going through them and all those things. And you will see that in doing that, you are making further additions. Because then you will say, oh, this point didn't come to my notice, now it has come to my notice, so that points get added to your memory as the addition to that event. And so, even without the interaction with the outside, you are making additions to that conditioning. and so that conditioning grows. So conditioning, although it is not fixed, it is growing. But if you understand the qualitative nature of the content, then you can also qualitatively understand what could be the response of this person. So in that person's conditioning, if qualitatively there is a lot of anger, then you will say that this person is likely to respond in an angry way in these situations, and therefore maybe then you have to avoid those situations so as not to make that person angry. Or somebody may have a lot of content of the type of irritation, then the interaction with such a person is likely to irritate you. And then you have to say that, well, I have to be careful and not interact too much with this person, otherwise I will end up in an irritation which I may find difficult to cope up with. And then of course there are other things like fear, jealousy, hatred. Means there will be definitely a conflict between those two human beings. So each one living as per his conditioning, and the conditioning through interaction all the time building up. And when two conditioned human beings interact with each other, then if the interaction is through some common interest, through some common point, then maybe they are able to go together. But if it is opposing each other, then there is definitely going to be a conflict. And through the conflict, then of course the destruction of the relationship, each one going in his own way, a lot of bitterness, and then out of all that, the isolation, that I have nothing to do with that person. And isolation will lead to loneliness, because when a person starts isolating himself from everything which he is in conflict with, then he starts feeling lonely, because he feels that there is nothing in this world to which he can relate, and he is all alone in this vast world, and so quite a sense of loneliness and despair. So this is how human beings are living their life. So a human being born as a conditioned human being lives his life as a conditioned life, and he also dies as a conditioned human being. And the conditioning continues even beyond the grave. Because Krishna just said that the psychological content continues, although the physical body dies. The psychological content, it continues, and therefore the conditioning continues. And so people resorting to suicide are merely carrying their conditioning to the next world. And if they are not able to cope up with that in this world, next world also they will not be able to cope up with it. And so that cannot be a solution to this. And so Krishna also says that if you believe in reincarnation, he doesn't say that whether there is reincarnation or not, but he says that if you believe in reincarnation, then if you are a conditioned human being in this life and you die, that conditioning continues, and if you are reincarnated, then you will be again reincarnated with all that conditioning. So there is no difference. So if a person thinks that he couldn't do these things in this life and he will do them in next life, and with that he feels satisfied that, well, although he has lost this life, he will not lose the next life, because he will have another opportunity to do these things. But for whatever reasons he could not do those things in this life, for the same reasons he will not be able to do that in the next life also. And so that conditioned existence will continue indefinitely. And that's what has been happening with human beings. Because human beings have existed on this earth since millions of years. And in all these years, they are still conditioned. They are not free of conditioning. So which means that even after taking so many reincarnations, they are the same, they are the condition. So which means that even if there is reincarnation, it doesn't help to uncondition a human being. And therefore when Krishnaji says that his only concern is to set man absolutely and unconditionally free, then here is a human being who says that he is concerned that human beings should be set unconditionally free. No, it's okay, sir. Now, how is it going to happen? In fact, the interesting thing is that towards the end of Krishnaji's life, he was asked, "Sir, has any human being been unconditionally free? You have been talking for such long time. Has anybody changed as per what you said the change is?" And he said, "None. Nobody has changed." So, does that mean that he has failed in his mission of setting man unconditionally free? So, he said, no, it cannot be called as a failure. Or whatever that he has done, it's not all waste. He said it is like sowing seeds, and they will sprout sometime or other. So in fact, many times in his talks, he will keep on asking the audience, so have you understood, have you understood? And then if he finds that there isn't much response from the audience, then he would say that, well, whether you understand or not, I will continue, because someday somebody will understand. So all that work isn't waste, and it may flower, it may unfold. But the question is that how a human being can be unconditioned? A conditioned human being, right? How he can uncondition himself? Is it possible that a human being can make himself completely unconditionally free? And Krishna says, yes, it is possible. But then how? Now, how is not asked in terms of systems or methods or the process, but how is asked in order to understand that how is it possible? So, for that, we have to understand what is the nature of this conditioning. What is the nature of this condition? So here I would like to point out or describe one experiment which was done by the scientists. So they were studying the life cycle of a parasite. A parasite is a living entity which survives on the other living entities. So it doesn't collect food or doesn't create food for itself, but whatever the other living entities have created, on that they survive. So that's why they are called as parasites, who live on the other living beings. So they are studying the life cycle of that parasite. So first they found that this parasite in the body of the snail, and through the secretions of the snail, this parasite came out of the body of the snail. This secretion was eaten by ants, and therefore the parasite landed in the body of the ant. And there, the next stage of his life cycle, it completed. Now after that, the further stage was to happen in the body of a cattle.
In the body of the
Cattle.
Cattle.
Yeah, cows or bulls or that cattle. Because scientists found this parasite in the body of the cattle also. So they were interested that how this parasite ended from the body of the ant in the body of the cattle. And so they started observing, made an experimental setup and started observing. So what they found was, they found that the behavior of the ants having parasite in their body was different than the behavior of the ants who did not have parasite in the body. So what was the difference? The difference was, the ants who had parasite in their body, those ants at the end of the day, they will go and rest on the tip of the grass. While the other ants who did not have parasite in their body, so they will not rest on the tip of the grass, they will go to their anthill or whatever it is, their regular habitat. But these infected ants, they will rest on the tip of the grass at the end of the day. So the next day when the cattle come for grazing, and as they eat that grass, they eat those ants also who are resting on the tip of those grass. And those ants ending up in the body of the cattle, then the parasite is already in the body of the cattle to complete the next stage of its life cycle. So the scientists then were interested in finding out why these ants, they go and sit on the tip of the grass. What does this parasite do to them? So their investigation showed that this parasite took control of the brain of the ant, changed its conditioning so that the ant at the end of the day after the sunset will go and rest on the tip of the grass. And for the ant, it is a normal behavior. Ant will think that yes, after the sunset it has to go and rest on the tip of the grass. That is the normal thing. But for the ants who are not infected by parasite, their conditioning is that they will go to their regular habitat at the end of the day. So this means these ants were conditioned by the parasites to sit on the tip of the grass, and the ants had no clue why they are sitting on the tip of the grass. They feel that that is what the normal thing is. And when those ants look at the other ants who don't rest on the tip of the grass, they think that those ants are abnormal. Their behavior is abnormal. What is normal is to sit on the tip of the grass. Now that is the nature of the conditioning. A conditioned entity or a conditioned human being doesn't even realize that he is conditioned. He feels that that is what he is. That is his normal existence, that is what normally he is. Not conditioned at all. But if the other human being is different than him, then he will say, oh, that fellow is behaving abnormally. And whatever things we very commonly see in our day-to-day life, right? A person in a provocative situation responding out of anger, and if he finds a person who doesn't respond in anger, he say, oh, that person looks abnormal. He doesn't get angry even if you provoke him, you abuse him, curse him, anything. He is not a normal human being. And then the height of abnormality is that you deify that person. You say, no, no, he is a saint. He is a saint because he doesn't behave like the common man. Their responses are totally different than the responses of a common man. So he is a saint. So by saying him saint, actually he is treating him as abnormal. And we are normal. We are the common people. This is what a human being is normally. And that person is the abnormal. And that's why Krishnaji never accepted this situation. He said, I am not a freak. I am just like any other human being. I am not abnormal. I am not somebody special. I am just like you. And therefore, whatever I have done or I have been able to do, for every human being it is possible to do that. And if one human being is able to set himself unconditionally free, then for every human being it should be possible. So then a human being who is deeply conditioned, not even aware that he is conditioned, but rather thinks himself as normal, as free, and living as per his conditioning, he feels that he is free. And whatever his conditioning is, he thinks that that is how the normal life is. So, in fact, even in tradition they say that the human nature cannot be changed. It is intrinsic. And so you have to just cope up with it, you have to just adjust with it, you have to just live with it. Do whatever best you can, but you can't change it. And therefore, in a way, a human being has accepted his conditioning as a normal state. And if he is able to live as per his conditioning, he feels free. He thinks that he is free. So, then what is the first step? What is the first thing? If a conditioned human being wants to uncondition himself, then what is the first step? What is the first thing that happens? So obviously, he has to first be aware that he is conditioned. If he is not even aware that he is conditioned, then he will not do anything. Only when he is aware that he is conditioned, only when he finds that he is conditioned, then he will want to do something about it, if he wants to. If he is happy with that conditioning, it's okay, then he won't do anything. But at least when he sees that he is conditioned, then there is a possibility that he may do something about it. So that is the first thing. Now, when does a human being become aware of his conditioning? If in his life things happen according to his wishes, according to whatever his likes, dislikes, according to what he wants, then he says, yes, life is nice, normal, happy, and therefore there is nothing to inquire, there is nothing to do. I am a happy man. I will live a happy life and die as a happy human being. So there is an interesting story told by Krishnaji to explain this kind of attitude. He says that there is an old lady living her normal life, it's a big joint family. Everybody is doing well in the family. Everything that is needed is available. All the, you can say, happiness, all the things, whatever it is. I mean, it's a very happy family. No suffering, no pain, nothing, very nicely living. So when that old lady looks at her life, everything is smooth and nice, she says that, seems God has forgotten me. So she goes to the temple, complains to the God that, my Lord, you have forgotten me. So when she comes back, she finds that her eldest son is dead. Then she says that God remembers me. He has not forgotten me. Which means that in our life, when things do not happen as per our wishes, when we land up in a situation or circumstances which are not according to our wishes or our choices or our likes and dislikes, then we start questioning why this is happening like this. So that questioning is the beginning of the awareness of this conditioning. Because when a person starts questioning, then naturally he will say, okay, the situation was like this, but why did I behave this way? And what happened out of that behavior, and so on. And then if he finds that all the time his typical response is creating difficulties for him, right? Then naturally he will ask, why do I keep on responding in that typical way and creating problems for me? And therefore then he tries to respond in a different way. And in that, if he is able to respond in a different way, then we say that yes, he has been able to manage himself and therefore able to avoid this thing. But then some other typical response of his will create another situation, and there again he will end up in managing it. He will find out what he can do, and if he is able to do, he manages. Then his life becomes one of adjustment. He knows his weaknesses, he knows his strong points, and he knows how to adjust them as per the situation. And therefore then he says he has no problem. And life goes on.
He has no sense.
No problems, yeah. And life goes on. But then a situation comes where, in spite of all his knowledge of management, in spite of all his efforts, when things do not happen according to his wishes, then he has to again question, why is it so? And when he finds that it's not possible to manage all the reactions all the time, then the real question arises that is it mandatory or necessary for me to respond psychologically like this only, or can there be a different psychological response? So that is where then he is in a way asking whether it is possible to change myself so that I will never respond in this way, and therefore I will not create a situation or consequence for me. So when he asks that question, right, then the inquiry has gone into the next level. Now it is not just a question of adjustment or management. Now it's a question whether that reaction will not arise at all. instead of letting the reaction arise, instead of letting the anger arise and then trying to manage it to avoid the unacceptable consequences, now he is asking, is it possible that the anger will not arise at all, so that I don't have to manage it. Now, when he asks that question, then he has to understand this whole process, the whole reaction of anger. So he again goes about it. He said, I have to observe this reaction of anger and study its nature, study its properties, how it works, functions, and maybe after that I will be able to end it or finish it. So he goes about it. Now the only way of investigation, the only way of understanding things that he knows is through knowledge. That means he has been living where he has been understanding things in terms of knowledge. If he wants to understand something, he will gather a lot of knowledge about it, and that knowledge will be factual based on actual experiments and all those things, and then on the basis of that knowledge he will understand things. So the same principle he applies here. So he starts acquiring a lot of knowledge about the reaction of anger, and then with that knowledge he is trying to understand this reaction of anger. So he finds that with all that knowledge of reaction of anger, maybe he is able to do something about it in some situations, but somehow that knowledge is not preventing the arising of the reaction itself. That means the anger will keep on arising. He will have knowledge with which he can understand, and he will say, okay, I got angry because of this and this, and then he may also do something which he can which can help him so that the reaction of anger subsides. But he is still not free of the reaction of anger, because in the next situation again he is going to get angry, and then he has to repeat all that process. So there is still no freedom from anger. And if his inquiry, if he continues or sticks to that position that yes, he wants to find out whether there can be a total freedom from the reaction of anger, in the sense that the reaction doesn't arise at all, and he finds that the way he is trying to learn about that anger through this method of learning which he knows, he finds that that is useless, because it only ends up in gathering a lot of knowledge about that reaction of anger, and anger continues to arise. It doesn't bring freedom from anger. So at that point he may ask a question whether there is a different kind of learning. Now here, looking at the conditioning of a human being, it is very unlikely that a person himself will ask this question. So that is where then the role of a person like Krishnamurti. If the enquirer is not asking this question for himself, then Krishnamurti is asking that question for the enquirer, and he is asking, can there be a different kind of learning? So that question then becomes a challenge for this enquirer, and then he has to work on that question. He has to find out whether there is a different kind of learning, and then the dialogue begins between Krishnamurti, a person like Krishnamurti, and that person. Then he will say, what do you mean by a non-accumulative learning, how does it come about, and so on. And then with that, then he brings in other things like awareness, attention, and those things. And then with that, he is trying to communicate what is this non-accumulative learning. Because only that kind of learning can possibly end this arising of the psychological reactions. Because when the whole structure from which the psychological reaction arises, when that whole structure is understood without accumulating knowledge about it. Because you see, the difficulty here is that the moment you accumulate knowledge about that structure, then that knowledge becomes part of the structure. And when knowledge becomes part of the structure is strengthened, it expands. So in your very attempt to understand the structure so that it is finished, so that it ends, so in that very attempt you are expanding the structure. You are making more and more addition to it. And therefore there is never a possibility of demolishing that structure. It's like, in order to empty the bucket, you are constantly filling it with water. So you are pouring water in the bucket in order to empty it. So that kind of thing is happening here. With the accumulative learning, you are all the time adding things in that structure, as a result of which the structure strengthens, the structure expands, and the very thing which should end keeps on growing. So the conditioning is growing. And that is why the non-accumulative learning, you don't accumulate anything, you don't gather knowledge or any such thing, and therefore you don't contribute anything to that. So this non-accumulative learning can come through non-accumulative observation, because it is through observation that we learn. You want to learn about anything, you have to begin with observation. You want to learn about your child, you have to start observing your child, how it behaves, how it conducts itself in various situations, how it responds, what are his likes, dislikes. So by observing only you can learn about the child. So if you want to learn about yourself, about your psychological structure, then you have to learn through observation. And observation also has to be non-accumulative. That means you are not gathering anything from that observation, but through the observation you are just looking at the thing, and then out of that looking there is a learning taking place. And so then what does observation mean? Because in our usual observation there is a contact, and through that contact we are receiving all the information from that thing, and it is stored in the brain, and in terms of that information we are understanding this. Now here we are not receiving any information, we don't want to receive, because when we receive it, it becomes part of us. Because we who are looking or who are observing are not different from what we are observing. It is part of me. My psychological reaction is part of me, it is not separate from me. And if I am not different or separate from my reaction, right, then if I start accepting the information arising out of that observation, then I am just adding to that reaction. And therefore, when you realize that you are not different from what you are looking at. So that is what the state of observer is the observed. And then there is only a contact. A contact is there all the time, but through that contact you are not drawing or receiving anything. You are just looking. And as you are looking, then that psychological reaction now is completely free to be what it is. Because if you are gathering something from your observation, then that reaction is not free to be what it is. Because whatever that you are gathering out of it, that will be as per your conditioning. Because as per your conditioning only you will gather things from that reaction. Whatever your conditioning doesn't allow, that you will not be able to gather. You can gather only what your conditioning allows. So which means that that reaction will be visible to you according to your conditioning. It will not be visible to you as it is, but it will be visible to you as it appears through your conditioning, through the screen of your conditioning. Right? And therefore, it will not be as it is. But when you are observing it, you are just being contacted, not receiving anything from that, then the reaction is as it is. And when the reaction is as it is, right, then that reaction is really free. Because we have said that the freedom is the freedom to live as per your conditioning. So even that reaction is free to live as per whatever it is. And when it is able to live as per whatever it is, then it is living its natural life, and therefore it will come to its natural end. So when it comes to its natural end, finished. And then that reaction will never come back again. It is finished. And with the finishing of that reaction in that way, then there is a sense of freedom which one will feel when something has ended permanently. There is a sense of void. If you have lost something, then there is a sense of void, of missing something. But if something has ended which was bothering you, then there is a sense of relief. Then there is a sense of freedom. Because in this also you see how the conditioning responds. Something which was very dear to you, you lose that, it ends, then you have a void, which means a sense of loss to you. But something which has been bothering you, right, comes to an end and not going to come back again, then you have a sense of relief or sigh of relief. Say that, oh, I am free now. But in both the cases, there is this sense of emptiness or sense of freedom. Now, out of this sense of freedom, then, right, you are able to understand things as they are. And when you live your day-to-day life and you observe everything that is happening with this sense of freedom, then you are able to respond to those situations adequately. Because then your response will be as per the demand of the situation, not as per your likes and dislikes, not as per your condition, but as per the demand of the situation. And then you will find that then the life is without any conflict. There is no conflict. And a life free of conflict then there are higher possibilities in one's life, in the sense that then your sensitivity grows, your energy builds up, and then maybe you are able to penetrate the deeper and subtler levels of life. And maybe then you will say that yes, life is after all not what I had been thinking, but life is far vast, too big. So that is the approach which Krishnaji has put forth. Now here the difficulty is to observe without accumulating. That is what we find it very difficult to do. Because in our observation, the thought does interfere, and when thought does interfere, we end up in accumulating. And we also end up in not observing things as they are, but as we wish to observe them. Which means observe them as per our conditioning. So they are visible as per our conditioning, not visible as actually they are. So that is the real difficulty in this approach. And you cannot ask Krishnamurti how to overcome this or what to do, because there is no system, no method. You have to find out yourself. And even if he tells you how to do or what to do, that will merely become a knowledge, which will be further addition to your conditioning. So this is where it stands. So now you can ask questions.
Sir, I have a question.
Yes.
This non-accumulative learning, could you explain it with an example?
Exactly, sir. I was also about to ask you the same question.
Example, let's say in a relationship, that is externally, and also internally, let's say when I am observing my irritation. And in your experience, how can this possibility of non-accumulative learning be applied? Because Krishnaji is not teaching us very directly how to apply.
May I answer?
Please.
With an illustration, just like I asked you yesterday, if you illustrate it, people who are not familiar with these complexities, it would facilitate them to understand more clearly. Even I would understand clearly if you give us an illustration.
I will give you an example. I have plenty of them, so I will give one of them. During one of his talks at Sanand, Krishnaji is talking about this matter that we have been talking. And he suddenly asks the audience, can you look at your wife without any knowledge, without the interference of thought? And suddenly the husband started looking at their wife. So Krishnaji said, no, not here. But can you look at your wife without any such interference? Now that is really the question. When you look at your wife, you are looking at your wife with all the prejudice, all the conditioning, all the knowledge about the wife, what she is to you. And then when there is interaction, all that interaction is through that knowledge. You will see that if your wife does something, how you respond to her. But a strange woman, a third party woman who is not related to you in any way, if she does the same thing, how you respond. Now that response itself will tell you that you are responding to your wife as per your conditioning. That means everything that you have gathered by way of living with her, all that plays a role there, and then your response is according to that. And sometimes this becomes a problem and becomes a cause of separation between husband and wife, because if the response is violent, if the response is not that good, then naturally the wife doesn't feel safe with the husband, and then she wants to separate. So for the husband, the question is that why does he respond to his wife in this way, and why does he respond to another lady in a different way? So which is due to the conditioning. Now the question is it possible to look at your wife putting aside all that conditioning? Don't think that she is your wife. Say that yes, she is another human being. She is a lady, she is another human being just like you. And now can you look at that human being? Now if you are able to put aside all that conditioning, then you will be able to see her as she is. Now this concrete example is given because it is easier to see or easier to understand. But the same thing applies to our psychological reactions also. Here at least you see that the wife is a separate entity than you, and therefore at least there is no confusion and you are able to look at her, if at all you are able to look. But when you are looking at your own psychological reaction, then it is not separate from you, it is not different from you. And yet, is it possible for you to look at that reaction, putting aside all the knowledge, all the thought which you may have about that reaction? And if you can do that, then that's the thing.
You did not flip side of the same coin, sir, because I hear you, I go back and I try and look at my wife, yes, and I'm discarding all the knowledge I have. Yes. So you did not flip side of the same coin and calling it as unconditioned.
No, what we are saying is that if you are able to look at another person, putting aside all your conditioning vis-a-vis that person, then you will be able to see that person as that person is. Because that person is also a conditioned person, right? And you are not able to see that person as per that person's actual conditioning, but you are able to see that person as per your conditioning. So which means that the conditioning of the other person is looked at through the screen of my conditioning. So then there is a clash. Because my conditioning says that wife should be like this, but the wife's conditioning is different, and therefore there is a conflict. So if you are able to put aside your conditioning at least, and then look at the other human being, then you will be able to see the other human being as per the conditioning of that other human being. And then maybe you will be able to do something about it. Maybe you will be able to help that other person to see things not as per the conditioning of that person, but as per what they actually could be. Then there can be a meaningful interaction, a meaningful dialogue.
Sir, but when is the non-accumulative portion here?
Yes.
This is keeping aside my condition.
Yeah, keeping aside your conditioning means you are not expecting anything from that person. Right? So, if you are expecting a certain kind of response, that is the accumulative kind of observation. Because you expect that this is what you should see, this is what you should get. Right? But when you are putting aside all your conditioning, then you are not expecting, you are not wanting anything from that person. You just want to look. When you look at the cloud, you don't want anything from the cloud. You just look at it because it is there.
So this will mean the setting aside the normal expectations in the social context.
Yes, everything. Everything, whether in social context, whether it is in one's own personal life context, or whether in the context of your particular relationship, in any, all the contexts are put aside.
The so-called normally accepted norms of behavior, etc.
All that is put aside.
Part of conditioning.
All that is put aside. And putting aside all the conditioning, when you are able to look at the other human being, then that other human being will be visible to you as actually that human being is. Other human being is definitely conditioned. We are not saying that he is unconditioned or she is unconditioned. He is definitely conditioned. But that conditioning we are not able to see as it is. We are seeing that conditioning through our conditioning, as per our conditioning, and therefore then there is a clash, because there is a conflict, because my conditioning may not go with the conditioning of the other person, and there will be quarrel. I will say my thing is right, she will say no, her thing is right, and all those things. So at least if one person is able to put aside his conditioning, then he can observe the other person exactly as that person is, and then the meaningful interaction can take place, because then he can point out, or point out in a way which is acceptable to the other person, and so on, and then the things will move in a completely different way.
Sir, just a minute, sir. Like you are saying about the husband-wife, and husband looking at the wife without having looking at her, without conditioning, and all. But for that, the person has to be aware of his own conditioning first of all.
Yes.
His own, where he is coming from, why he is coming from, and his own conditioning. When he is aware of his own conditioning, of his own interactions and behavior,
Yes.
and why he is behaving in such and such a way,
Right.
because of maybe...
No, not in that way, not in that way. Because that will mean that he is trying to look for the cause for his behavior, for his conditioning and all those things. So we are not saying that. What we are saying is that when observing another person, the conditioning of this person is responding. Right? Say I am observing, say X. As I am observing X, in that observation, my conditioning responds. That means there is a reaction arising in me in response to observing that person. Now what I am saying is that that reaction, it is arising. I can't do anything about it because that is arising as per my conditioning. But if I am aware of that reaction, right, then I am able to look at the other person without the screen of this reaction, because I am seeing the reaction also which is arising in me, and I am also looking at the other person. So I am not mixing up the things. I am able to keep my reaction apart, separate, not letting it interfere, because I am aware what's happening to me. So say a reaction of anger is arising in me. So I won't allow that reaction of anger to interfere in my observation, which means that I will not say anything nasty or anything violent out of my reaction of anger. I am aware of my reaction of anger, and as long as I am aware, that reaction doesn't interfere in my observation or in my interaction, then I can still interact with the other person and find out.
In other words,
Yes.
the work has to start in oneself very first of all.
Yes.
Being aware of his own responses,
Yes.
of one's own responses,
Exactly.
reactions,
Yes.
conditioning.
Yes.
The work has to start within first.
Yes.
One has to understand
No,
the
no,
internal
no, but
background.
no, you see, no, we can't make that kind of conclusion also, because you see, awareness, where it will begin, we can't dictate that it has to begin here in myself. Awareness can become anywhere. Like say Krishna says, you enter a room, then you are aware of the color, you are aware of the people sitting, you are aware of this, you are aware of that, and then you are also aware of what is your response that is arising in you. So awareness can begin anywhere. The point is that whether there is awareness or not, that's all. Now whether it has to begin first here and then there, that question is not relevant, in the sense that not important.
That's it, but what is the nature of that awareness, as in how does it, where does it begin within the individual? Does it begin with, I'm okay with whatever happens, or?
No, I will say, no, you see the awareness. I will give you again another example, which may clarify to some extent. Let's say you are fast asleep. When you are fast asleep, you are not aware of anything. But as you are waking up, now during waking up, you are not suddenly aware of everything clearly. During waking up, first you are aware of your existence, that yes, I am there. Then you are vaguely aware of your surrounding, yet you are not seeing all the details. And as you wake up further, then you start seeing details. You start hearing sounds. And when you are fully awake, then everything is clearly visible. Same thing happens in that way in this awareness also. When the reaction is arising, right? If you are unaware, you are not able to see that reaction at all. It arises, does whatever it does, and when the consequences come to you and you suffer, then you say, oh, I have done this, I shouldn't have done this. But when the reaction is arising, right, when the anger is arising, it just began to arise. Now at that point, if there is an awareness, right, then yes, and that awareness is just the sense that, yeah, anger is arising. Not that I have to do something or I have to prevent it or any such thing, but just this sense that yes, anger is arising. So that sense that anger is arising will make you immediately alert. You will say, oh, it is arising, I have to be alert, I have to be watchful. I can't simply give in or get carried away by it. So the moment you are alert, the anger stops there. It doesn't further come up. And as long as you are attentive to that, it is not able to do anything. It is just held there. The moment you become inattentive, it comes up. It is just waiting for you to be inattentive. In fact, it may do everything to make you inattentive.
Sir, one question can I ask?
Yes, please.
You have given that example of a parasite which has captured the brain of the ant.
Yes.
And made it sit on the grass in the evening time.
Yes.
Likewise, is there any parasite that is conditioning the human brain?
Yes. Oh yeah, there are lots of parasites. In fact, you see, the interesting thing is, the whole setup of nature, and we have said that the nature does not lose a single, even the minutest opportunity to manifest and live. In the morning we were talking about that, and we said that even if there is a crack in the wall, and in that crack a seed happens to fall, then even the space in the crack will be used by the nature to live. Which means that that seed will sprout, a sapling will come, a plant will grow, and the plant will live its life, it will have flowers, it will have fruit, and finally after completing its life it will be there. So even that small space in that little crack in the wall, the nature has used to live. So in the same way here, everything is used by the nature to live. So which means that our body, this physical body, is also a space which can be used by other living entities to live. So in fact, scientists have found out some living you can say bacteria or whatever it is, who have no reason to exist in our body. They are not helping our body in any way, but they are also not harming our body in any way. They simply live there because it is conducive to their life. And so they are happily living there and they are not bothering us. They don't do any harm to us, but also they don't do any benefit also to us. But they are simply living there. Now, will you allow a person who doesn't harm you or doesn't benefit you to enter your house and live there permanently? Now, we are not even aware of such entities living in our body. And body doesn't do anything because the body mechanism will come into action only when that bacteria does something. Only then. But if it is not doing anything, it just happens to be there, the body also doesn't respond. Okay.
So two questions, sir.
Yeah.
One is you said, Krishnaji said there was no one who was freedom, I mean totally free.
Yeah.
But doesn't it apply to Krishnamurti? He must be a free man? No. He was wanted to exclude himself.
Yeah, Krishnaji was a free man, yes.
Was a free man?
Yes.
That's one point.
Yes.
Second point, sir, you made a mention about the accumulation of non-accumulative knowledge.
Yes, non-accumulative learning, non-accumulative observation, not non-accumulative knowledge.
Knowledge.
No, not knowledge.
Non-accumulative observation.
Observation, non-accumulative learning. Knowledge is always accumulative.
Knowledge is always accumulative.
And limited.
Yeah, unlimited and fragmented.
Fragmented.
Sir, every experience has got two parts in it. One part is the information and knowledge, and other part is the psychological content.
Yes.
The problem is with the psychological content, whereas the information part is useful
Yes.
in our day-to-day living, day-to-day functioning and all that.
Right.
Like unless that knowledge is there, I will not be able to go to my house, I will not be able to recognize people whom I met 2 days back, etc., etc. So, how to
draw a line
draw a line, exactly.
between what is psychological and what is factual.
Yes.
What is useful so
Yeah.
that we can
Yeah,
keep
yeah,
it,
yeah.
and what is not
Yeah,
useful or problematic.
Correct.
Then how to
Yeah.
once we are able to make this distinction, then we know what we have to get rid of
Yeah.
and what we have to keep.
Correct.
Krishnaji has mentioned very clearly, sir,
Yeah.
whatever he mentions about the psychological knowledge does not cover the technological and scientific
Yes.
kind of knowledge
Yes.
that is required for your day-to-day.
Yeah, that Krishna has very clearly
Very
said.
clearly mentioned several
Yes.
times.
Yes.
No, but who will decide that? This is
Yeah.
technological
No,
knowledge,
but
I need it,
this-
it's good for me. This is a psychological knowledge, I don't need it, it creates a problem for me. Who will draw the line?
No, you see, what he has said, Krishna has very clearly said.
Yeah, that's correct.
That technological knowledge is required for day-to-day life and psychological is the problem. Now, Murtiji's question is that, how do I find out which is psychological knowledge and which is factual knowledge?
Your work.
Right? My work.
Yes.
But because it is my work, therefore it has a problem for me. If it were Krishnaji's work, he would have said how to find out. But he has just mentioned that there is a technical or factual knowledge and there is a psychological knowledge. And he says that psychological knowledge is a problem while the factual knowledge is required to conduct your day-to-day activities. Now my problem is that I understand the distinction, but how do I find out in my life which is psychological and which is factual or which is technological? And if I am not able to make that distinction, then I can't do anything about it. Then the psychological may go with me as a factual, and I may make a mess out of it. Or the technical may also be thrown away, and then again I will have a difficulty in conducting my day-to-day activity because I may forget driving and I want to drive, but I have thrown away all the factual knowledge of driving, so I can't drive now, can't reach home. So this is the question, that how do you find out which is psychological, and if you are able to distinguish it clearly, then you are also able to take some action vis-a-vis psychological or factual. So that is the question. How does one find out what is psychological knowledge and what is the factual knowledge? Right? Now again I will give you an example. If I ask you what you were doing on such and such date, any random date at such and such time, maybe a week ago or maybe 10 days ago, what you were doing at such and such time. So most probably you will not remember. You will, unless you are doing something significant, but if you are living just your normal day-to-day routine, probably you will not remember what you were doing on that day at that time. But if I ask you 10 years ago, you interacted with that person, what did he say to you? And you will clearly remember with all the details.
What do you mean when you are hurt by that?
Right. And in fact, even if the questioner doesn't want to listen to all those things, but you will just pour it out and you will force it on the other person that he has to listen, because this is what that person said, and whether it was right for him to say this, how could he say this such thing, and all those things. So you clearly remember all these things. Now
remember, you relive that.
Yeah, that's okay. But my point is this.
Correct.
My point is, in the first case, 10 days ago, whatever happened, you don't remember. But 10 years ago, whatever happened, you remember in all details. Now, what is the difference in these two memories? Because both are the memories. Memory means there is a knowledge which is stored in the memory. Now, in the first case also it is a knowledge, in the second case also it is a knowledge. The first case you don't remember the knowledge, the second case you remember the knowledge. So what is the difference?
You created a psychological content.
Exact. So which means that a knowledge which has a psychological content associated with it, you are most likely to remember. And a knowledge which doesn't have any psychological content in it, you are likely to forget it unless you need to use it in your day-to-day activity. Because there is lots of technical knowledge we need to use in our day-to-day activity, and therefore we remember it. But if we don't need to use it, then we are likely to forget it. Like say in your mobile phone you have a certain function. Now if that function is daily you are required to use it and all this thing, then you remember. But if you require it only once in a while, maybe after 6 months again you require it, you have already forgotten. Then you will say, oh, can somebody tell me how to do this and all these things. So even when somebody had told you 6 months ago how to do it and you had done it, but now after 6 months you don't remember. So again you ask that same person. And if you ask that same person, that same person, why are you asking same thing again and again to me, bothering me and all these things? Such simple thing, can't you just remember and hold on all these things? But the reason is that the factual memory, we are likely to forget unless we are constantly using it. Otherwise we will forget. So of course there are ways to remember, in the sense that maybe you store it. But there are all funny jokes about it. That means there is a funny joke that they wear that sacred thread, no? So that fellow, whenever he is given told some task, he will just tie a knot there and say that, okay, this knot is for that task. And then afterwards, he ends up with so many knots, he just forgets which knot is for which task, and so it comes to nothing. So in any case, our point is that an information or a knowledge which has a psychological content, we are more likely to remember than a knowledge which is just factual. Because the psychological content is something not different from us. It is me. It is my reaction. It is my suffering. It is my pang. And therefore I am likely to remember it. When the factual thing is, I have nothing to do with it. And therefore I need it, or if I need it, then that's where I will try to get it. Otherwise I have nothing to do with it. So how does one find out which is psychological and which is factual? So any piece of knowledge or information which gives rise to a psychological state in you, which either makes you feel nice or it makes you feel bad or bitter, any psychological response from your side as you recall that memory, right, is definitely a psychological memory, is definitely a psychological knowledge. Then that is what you have to observe. And if it doesn't give rise to any psychological response in you, then it is factual. So what was psychological before can become factual later on. Because you see, somebody has said something bad to you, you got hurt, and whenever you recall that incident, you again feel that hurt, you again feel bad. But you will find that after a long period of time maybe, or after sorting out the matter, then even if you recall that memory, you don't feel bad.
Yeah.
So the factual information of that event is there in you, but that doesn't give rise to any psychological response in you. So which means that the memory which was psychological before is now only factual. It has lost the psychological content, right? And therefore you can say that it is no longer psychological. So now it is clear that what is psychological and what is factual. Psychological is whenever it gives rise to a psychological reaction or psychological response in you, it changes your psychological state, then it has definitely a psychological content, and then you need to observe it, inquire into it or be with it and so on till that psychological content is gone.
But sir, when an experience is taking place, at that point, how to discern this is psychological, I should not record this, this is information and knowledge, factual knowledge, I should record this. How can you do it at that point in time?
Wait. Now, when the event is actually happening, what should I record, what I should not record? I have a knowledge about this, what I should record and what I should not record. Now, will that knowledge help me not to record or record? What I am in a way is asking is that, will the knowledge lead to the corresponding action? No, the knowledge will not lead to corresponding action. I have the knowledge that cigarette smoking is injurious to health, but that knowledge doesn't lead me to the corresponding action. I keep on smoking. I like smoking.
But recording happens irrespective, isn't it?
Yes. No, what I am trying to say is this, that the mere knowledge that psychological should not be recorded, only the factual should be recorded, and the knowledge how to find out what is psychological and what is not psychological or factual, that mere knowledge will not lead to the corresponding action. And when it doesn't lead to corresponding action, right, then the question arises that when one is actually in that situation, then how can one do that, or what is one to do? Because I know this is psychological, not to be recorded. This is factual, can be recorded. But I find that in spite of this knowledge or understanding, the psychological also does get recorded, or the factual gets forgotten, So what am I to do?
Yeah.
Right?
Catch 22 situation.
No, not catch 22. What I am trying to say is that even after pointing out,
Yes.
the person is not able to act or not able to do it. That is the reason why Krishnaji never tells you what you should be doing. Because even if he tells you, you will say, I can't do. Or it doesn't happen.
Anger is the most common example.
Yes.
I think even the factual ones are also probably recorded and we're just giving a little more coloring and conditioning to the psychological ones. That's what at least it seems to me.
No, and very often even the factual, when it gets that psychological element, then it becomes psychological.
Yes.
Factually say, even in the business, say some consignment is to arrive. It's a factual knowledge that consignment has been sent from there and it is going to arrive here on such and such date in this way and all this thing, right? Simply factual knowledge. Yet the person to whom the consignment is going to come, he is worried whether it will reach properly or not, whether something will happen, or whether will I get it or it will get damaged. What if it doesn't arrive? And therefore he is generating a psychological component with that factual memory, and all that gets added to it. And when it does arrive as per expectation, then there is a sigh of relief. Okay, things are okay. So which means that that issue has stopped bothering you.
But if it doesn't arise,
Yeah, then he is in a difficulty, because then he has to suffer that loss, and then there will be suffering that, well, so much loss. And if that loss is accommodable, then fine. If it is not, then he is finished. Says, now my business is gone. Too much loss.
See, suppose it is work in progress. I mean, this constant work in progress, it's not a one-time phenomenon. It is essentially, it has to be a work in progress.
No, but that is actually the situation, no, in our life. Our life is not a one-time phenomenon. Our life is a work in progress. We are living continuously. Daily we are waking up, doing our routine and all these things. So it's a life in progress. Things are happening. It's never the situation that, well, now it has stopped, now it is finished. And even if you say it is finished, the new thing is already begun. So you never have a moment where there is nothing. So it's all in progress.
Dynamic.
And dynamic. And so in the dynamic situation, whether one is able to observe. Now you will be able to observe only if you are not responding psychologically to what is happening. Or even if you respond psychologically, that psychological response also you have to be able to observe.
Attention also plays a role.
Yes, attention plays a role, and because from awareness the attention arises.
Without reacting to the
Yes.
Like suppose all that sequence, attention, perception.
See, the sequence is, the awareness is the first thing that happens. First you are aware. When you are aware, right, you want to find out the details, you want to look at it, and therefore wanting to look at it gives rise to attention. So you attend, and when you attend to that, then the observation happens. So you are aware of something, then you pay your attention to what you are aware of, and when you pay attention to that, you end up in observing that. And out of that observation, then the thought arises, the thinking, the accumulating knowledge and all this thing. So what Krishnaji is saying that when you start observing, observe, not let the thought interfere. But if thought interferes, because we have no control over our thought, it will interfere. But when it arises, then can you observe that thought also? Which means that you have to be aware of that thought, then your attention is paid to that thought, and then you end up in observing that thought. Most often what happens is that you are not even aware That you already started thinking.
Sir, awareness itself is a form of observation, is it not?
See, when I am waking up and I am just aware of my existence, just aware. Now, where is the observation in this?
Sir, Krishnaji himself made a statement, not a definition or anything, saying that awareness is observation without condemnation, justification or identification. So, awareness is basically observation.
No, no. You have to see in what context he is saying it.
He is talking about awareness.
No, no, he is talking about awareness. Then why are you bringing observation?
Yeah, that's what I am saying, sir. The first fundamental point I am saying is awareness is a form of observation. And in the human beings, one second.
When talking about awareness, why do you have to bring in observation and say that awareness is a form of observation? Or observation is a
So
form
what is
of
awareness then? What is awareness? Let us begin
That's
at
what
the
we have
beginning.
explained.
Huh?
The very beginning we have said.
Seeing,
As you
seeing,
wake
right?
up,
Seeing, listening is awareness. That is also
now we are
observation.
bringing in so many terms to explain what is awareness. Then the
Sir, observation is fundamental for all human beings.
You see, in a dialogue, when you take an approach, you have to stick to it. You can't suddenly bring in other things and say that then what is this related with this and what is the relationship between this and that. Because the enquiry doesn't demand that you have to bring in. If the enquiry demands, then yes. But if the enquiry doesn't demand, like say now I am trying to understand what is awareness. So I want to understand awareness by itself, not in terms of observation, not in terms of this or that, or not in terms of what all the things Krishnaji has talked about. I just want to understand awareness by itself, what it means. And so if I want to understand awareness in that sense, then I have to begin from scratch. Where does it begin, that awareness? So we have taken that example that as I am waking up from the sleep, the awareness begins there. I mean, the very waking begins with the sense of awareness, the sense of existence, that yes, and then a little bit of vague awareness of what is your surrounding. You are aware that yes, you are there, and then there is surrounding, and then the awareness as it grows, in the sense that when you start waking up further and you see all the details and all those things, and then out of that you can say that now you are aware of things around you, and you are aware of all the details and everything and those things, but you are aware of the details only when you look at them. If you don't look at, say I wake up and I see there only, I don't see here also.
Senses perceive, right? Not necessarily only when you look at them, even your senses perceive.
Yes.
You could be aware of things even without looking at it.
No, the senses don't perceive. See, again, this is not correct. No, let me see. Yeah. You are walking on the road. You are engrossed in your own thoughts. Your eyes are doing their function. They are receiving all the inputs and seeing things. But you are engrossed in your own thoughts. So you are not seeing things. But the eyes are seeing. Senses are doing their work. The sound is entering the ear, and the ears are sending those sensations to the brain. The eyes are doing their function. They are receiving the light, sending it to the brain. But the brain is busy, not processing those things. So therefore the perceiving or this thing is not happening. So if even a person whom you know, he passes by you, you are engrossed in your thought, you don't notice him. And if somebody asks you, did you see this? You say no. Then he will say, but just now he passed this way.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Say, I don't know.
I met a situation where your eyes are closed, but you sense the presence of somebody else or fragrance.
Yes, yeah. That means the senses, you see.
In that sense, I asked.
The input can be received through various sensory organs, and since each sensory organ is a specialized organ, so it is capable of receiving a specialized input.
Yeah.
Right? So if there is a fragrance, you receive the fragrance with the nose. But if there is no fragrance, then the nose is doesn't have to do any function about it, and so on. But those are the further details. What I am trying to say is, the awareness is just the awareness. That means you don't see the details. You are just aware that yes, something is there, all those things. But unless you look at it, you won't know what it is. You are just aware, yes, there is something around you. But you don't know what it is.
Is being conscious is awareness?
No, wait. Now don't bring the conscious awareness. We are going to confuse. You see, this is the, actually this is a unwritten, you can say, a rule in a dialogue, where it says that when you have taken a particular line of investigation, you have to follow it to its end. Not just break it and then start another line of investigation and then third line, then it is not investigation at all. Yeah, then you have lots of patches, lots of hodgepodge, and then there is a lot of confusion, because then you don't know how one patch is related to another. But if you pursue that line of investigation, then out of that the things start emerging. And then when the things emerge like that, then you don't have to worry about what is its relationship with this, because it has emerged from that, so you immediately see that yes, this is how it is related. So we don't have to even ask what is the difference between this or that, or how this is related to that, and all these things, because we are moving with that line of investigation. So here we are saying that the awareness as it arises, right, from that awareness there is the intent to find out what is there around, of which I am aware, and with that intent then the attention arises, because then that energy of that intent gets focused on that. So that is what attention. And when you do attend something, right, that then sets up the actions on the part of the sensory organs, because through the sensory organs you are sensing, or through whatever it is, and then you start looking at this. So that ends up in observation, or that ends up in listening, or that ends up in smelling, or that ends up in whatever it is. Or if it is nothing external but internal, right, then that ends up in the deepening of the awareness, in the sense that ends up in sensing it.
Sir, you are saying observation can take place only in a state of attention, right? That is,
gives rise to observation.
that is observation without the observer. That is pure observation.
Yes.
Agreed. But there is a basic observation which manifests in the human body. There are two streams. One is the faculty of thinking, other one is the faculty of observation. In a newborn baby, human baby, if you observe carefully, at the age of 4 months or 5 months, the child starts observing, fixing the eyes, looking at people, listening, reacting to mother's voice, blah blah and all. The faculty of thinking comes a little later, at the time of 8 months or 9 months. So the faculty of observation is very much there, manifest in not only in human beings, in all living animals.
The faculty as consciously thinking comes later.
Yes, exactly.
But thinking as a response of memory is there right from the beginning, because the child is responding from memory. Otherwise, how will he know that it is the
child will not respond.
Yeah, of course.
The memory may be dormant.
No, It will respond from memory, in the sense that when it feels hungry, right, then there will be a response from memory. It will want milk, and then it understands that whom to, or how to demand from milk, so it will start crying. So in all that thing, the thought as a response of memory is functioning, but there is no conscious thinking, in the sense that there is no thinking in order to understand, in order to pursue logically and rationalize and extract more knowledge or information. So that activity the brain is not yet capable of. The brain is capable of only collecting or gathering the knowledge or information and responding from that knowledge and information. It is just like non-thinking entities, animals, birds, plants. They are not capable of thinking, but they can receive the information directly from the input. So from the environment. So if the insect finds that this object is a botheration for it, then it will try to go around it. It won't. Then it will try to avoid it. So that avoidance, that action of avoidance, is the response of memory. And if you take response of memory as thought, then that means thought is operating there also. But the conscious thinking is, which we call as the intellectual activity. That intellectual activity will be absent there in those non-thinking entities. And through the intellectual activity, actually the human beings are creating lots of problems for themselves. That is the...
Yeah, thank you, sir. Let us move on.
Sir, I have questions.
Yeah, please.
So when you say that a newborn baby, psychological content is already conditioned psychology.
Yes.
Now, sir, the other example which you gave is that when you ask a person, say for example, on 10th of December, so time, he may not remember, but when he is engaged for a task psychologically, then he remembers everything and does. Now, sir, as a father, or I remember the birth of my child and all the events, everything, anxiety and evidence. But when I ask, and we as personally, or a newborn, he doesn't remember anything about his birth.
Yes.
So, is it correct to say there is no psychological print there, and is it right to say that the slate should be absolutely blank, sir, and there is no conditioning there?
No, we are not saying that slate should be absolutely blank or no conditioning should be there. We are not saying that, because that's not possible. The conditioning will be there. What we are saying is that, is it possible to look at that conditioning? Is it possible to understand it, and then out of understanding there is the freedom from that conditioning? That is what is our problem. We are not saying that the conditioning should not be there. It will be there, because that is how the things happen in nature. And we have also seen how the conditioning happens, I mean the beginning and how it accumulates and all those things that happen. But given that a human being is a conditioned entity, whether it is possible for that human being to break through that conditioning and be free. So that's where then this observation and all these things.
Sir, what about the Krishnaji? Was he born with unconditioned mind, an empty mind?
See, the interesting thing is that Krishnaji says that that child had a vacant mind right from the beginning. Secondly, what he says is that whatever he is talking about, he himself has never gone through any of that. See, he talks about fear, he talks about anger, he talks about all the psychological content, and he explains their nature and what they are, the structure, what happens and all those things, without he himself having gone through any of that. So he says he was never jealous, there was never fear and all these things. But from his biography, of course, we do find that as a child he was afraid of some spot. That means they used to go in the Adar river for swimming, And in that swimming, of course they will swim, those children. And what CWL found was that K as a boy was avoiding certain spot in that river. He was not, probably he was afraid to go there. That spot was dark, and probably he was afraid of darkness and all these things. So when CWL noticed it, he immediately started working on it. He said, the world teacher cannot be afraid. So he has to find out why he is afraid of these things. So even after finishing the swimming, he said to Krishna, that is that boy Krishna, okay, let's go swimming again. And he himself went with him. He took him to that spot. He made him swim there, exactly at that spot where he was afraid to go. And then he said, is there anything to be afraid of? Nothing. So fear gone, no fear. So except for that, probably you don't see any manifestation of fear in Krishnamurti's life. Then as for the reaction of anger, Krishnaji himself mentioned that in his whole lifetime, he got angry only once. And that anger was also not anger, actually it was some kind of irritation. Irritation is a kind of anger only. And he said that only once that happened in his life, and the person with respect to whom it happened still keeps on reminding him that, see, you were angry at that time.
So the conditioning that is suppose in our daily life, we wanted to take a new step. Generally we are afraid. So the story that you have told is about Krishna. So is it that coming from our own conditioning that might be fearful to us, or that might be a place we might not survive with, taking a new position in the job or taking something. So because in the present conditioning I am fine, perfectly alright. But I might get scolded there, or any kind of fear. So is it already coming from that condition so that they are able to take care?
Yes. It's all, our conditioning functions in every aspect of our life, in everything that we do. So even in the job also, the conditioning will function. That means we will be afraid of taking certain steps and so on, or we may be allured to take some steps which later on we repent. Like say in our earlier days, I mean, young people getting attracted to Krishnamurti, having good jobs and all those things, and then they are so much allured by his teaching that they just want to give up everything and join him and then be with the teaching and all these things. So a lot of people, they left their lucrative jobs and they joined, and finally they came out. I mean, they just couldn't continue, and they have lost the job and they haven't got anything from the teaching, and so their situation was not that happy. So then of course, whatever they continued with their life, and lots of such people we came across. So if you are taking any action or whatever you want to do, I mean, it should be well thought, properly investigated, properly gone through, and maybe based on whatever, even a fragment of knowledge or understanding, that should be made full use of, and a decision based on that taken. And then if things don't happen according to your wishes, then from that incident you learn. So there is always this learning. There is no place for regret. There is no place for remorse. Either you take a calculated risk, and if that calculated risk also doesn't work as per your calculation, then you are not in despair or you are not disappointed. You learn from it and try to move ahead, and so on. So I think there is no place for regret or remorse in life. If one is in the learning mode, then from every event, from every happening, one is learning.
ईश्वर जी, मैं हिंदी में बात करूँगी ताकि सब समझ सकें। तो ये अगर सीखने की जो बात आप जो बोल रहे हैं, अगर हम मुझे ये सीखने को मिला नहीं, अगर इतनी सी बात समझेंगे तो बात ठीक है, लेकिन अगर सीखने को मैं मेजर करना शुरू करूँगी कि मैं इतना ही सीखा, मुझे इतना सीखना था, कि मैं जब एलिमेंट ऑफ मेजर नापने की जो बात आ जाती है,
तो उसमें वो सेल्फ आ गया।
हाँ, तो फिर वहाँ जो सीखने की जो वेरी पर्पस बिहाइंड दैट, तो सीखने के लिए जो हमने जो कुछ भी सीखा, तो सीख के भी फिर वो प्रयत्न पूरा बेकार ही हो जाएगा।
हाँ, मतलब ये होगा कि जहाँ तक सीखा है वहाँ तक तो सीखा है, लेकिन उसके बाद जो होने वाला है, जो इसके बारे में आपने नहीं सीखा है, तो उसका क्या करेंगे? तो उसके बाद क्या होता है कि यूजुअली जो हमने सीखा है उसका कोई खास उपयोग हमें होता नहीं है, क्योंकि वैसा फिर हमारे जीवन में होता ही नहीं है, दूसरा ही कुछ होता है। और दूसरा जो होता है तो हम सीखने के लिए तैयार नहीं है उसको, क्योंकि हम कहेंगे हमको इतना ही सीखना, इतना ही काफ़ी है। तो फिर तो सिचुएशन तो फिर बराबर हो गई, जैसा पहले थे वैसे ही रहेंगे। तो इसका मतलब देयर इज नो सच पॉइंट वेयर यू कैन से दैट आई हैव लर्नड एंड देयर इज नथिंग फर्दर टू लर्न, बट देयर इज a situation where learning as a constant movement is all the time going on, and because you are learning, there is no psychological accumulation. When you are in a learning state, there is no psychological accumulation. Now if there is no psychological accumulation, then there is nothing to learn. After all, you are trying to learn about your psychological accumulation, psychological content. But if it is not there, then there is nothing to learn. Then it's only a factual knowledge, factual information, and a learning in that context, right? Only those things, they will be there. But psychologically, there is nothing to learn. So that is actually the beauty of this Krishnaji's teaching, because many times Pupuji would say that, sir, you talk so much about learning, and suddenly you say that there is nothing to learn. And when you say there is nothing to learn, it's like a Zen statement. It gives us a shock. That so much you are talking about learning, and then suddenly you say there is nothing to learn. So it comes as a shock. It's like a Zen master hitting you with a rod to make you aware or alert. But it is in this sense that when you are in the moment of learning, there is no psychological accumulation, and if there is no psychological accumulation, there is nothing to learn. Because after all, about that only you are trying to learn.
Accumulation is nothing but that measurement is how much I have.
Yes.
So that is concept of measurement comes in, accumulation comes in.
Yeah. So when the measurement comes, that means that is the thinker which has come into existence, and it is measuring. Then it will say that, okay, today I am getting angry so much, so tomorrow I will try to get less angry. And then eventually I will be free of anger, because every day I will keep on trying to get less and less angry, and then only 0.1% anger will remain, and then one day I will get rid of that also, I will be completely free. But it doesn't say that 0.1 can immediately become 100 if there is too much of provocation.
But the problem is this deception is so easy to fall into.
Yeah. No, this is a trap. I mean, the falling in the trap of psychological becoming is very common, very easy, and we are not even aware that we are fallen in that trap. Yeah.
Just conscious that we are out of time.
Yeah.
And
so we should stop now.
No, so just wanted to ask. So for many of us here, one of our biggest conditioning is our relationship with God. Today is Vaikuntha Ekadashi, so many people have deep reverence. Now, if I am a newcomer to Krishnamurti attending this meeting for the first time, I will feel all this is psychoanalysis, advanced psychoanalysis. So how will this study help me to have some understanding of the sacred? Or without this understanding, Krishnaji probably, or many saints have also said that till you are pure, there is no relationship with the sacred. So how will the study of Krishnaji's teachings help me in my journey to understand God or the sacred?
No, but in this today's inquiry, the issue of sacred doesn't come at all. In the sense, it's altogether a different topic. Probably may not be relevant to take it up in this dialogue, because then we will start something entirely different line of investigation.
Actually, that's very relevant questions. What Ken is asking. Very relevant questions, because somewhere everybody faces this dilemma. We can say, what does the Krishnaji say about this? And he never talks anything about the sacred or God or something. Of course, he considers that otherness. We keep coming across otherness in his books. But immeasurable, he says, otherness, he says. So he asks you to find out about your own self. So that confusion always remains.
But what sir is saying, it is not the topic for today.
That's true, sir. That's a very good topic, actually. Take it.
No, it's not that I want to restrict to the topic, but what I am trying to say is that we will begin a completely different line of investigation, and probably we don't have time to pursue it to its end.
That's true.
And then we will end up in just some fragments of information about it based on what Krishnaji has taught, and I don't think that will be of much use. It will only generate various opinions and reactions in us. If we don't like those statements, then there will be more confusion and more reactions about it, and so on. And to put it in proper perspective, we need a whole dialogue like the one which we have carried out. So,
how do we this doubt that all this is psychoanalysis? This is through very logically I'm building things, and so
no. See, it will be psychoanalysis if you are gathering knowledge out of this and trying to apply that knowledge to get things done, which is the psychiatrist does, right? Then it becomes a psychoanalysis. But when you talk about a non-accumulative observation, right, when you talk about a reaction not arising at all, then it is not psychoanalysis, then it is something different, because that is what even the psychologists are unable to understand, how it can happen.
Definitely higher dimension.
So yeah.
Higher dimension.
Because the psychoanalysis is still in the realm of thought.
Limited by.
Yeah, limited by thought, in the realm of thought, based on knowledge, and through psychoanalysis, the analyst is trying to gather more and more information of the patient, and based on that knowledge, he is trying to devise a method or a way to modify that person's responses so that he appears normal in his life, so that whatever has been bothering him, that no longer bothers him. So that is what the function of the psychiatrist.
So I have a question. Can you elaborate a little bit on when learning is happening, psychological content is not getting
Accumulated, yes.
Yeah, accumulated. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, that's right. That means, say an event is happening and the person who is going through that event, he is in a learning mode. So learning mode means he is observing, because without observation you cannot learn. So he is observing, and in that observation, because it is a non-accumulative observation, he is not accumulating anything. So even if a psychological reaction arises in that event, right, the reaction arises and it subsides, it goes. It's not accumulated, not gathered, not collected. Because the person is in a learning mode. So in a learning mode, he is not accumulating anything. So he is not looking for something to get hold of. He is just looking, whatever that is happening. So if the event is that I am interacting with another person, that is the event. So I am just listening to what that person is saying. I am just observing his gestures. I am just listening to the tone of his voice. I am just listening to what it is generating in me as a response.
So that's all physiological. Yes.
Yeah.
Factual or physiological.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
But that physiological means there is a psychological also, because what is the response arising in me?
Right. So that's my question, sir. So
Yes.
there is a psychological accumulation also.
No, there is not a psychological. There is already an accumulation in me. The accumulation which is already in me, which is my conditioning, that conditioning is responding to in the interaction with that person, and that response is a psychological response because it is coming out of psychological. Now when that psychological response arises, I am not gathering it further. I just let it happen, I observe it, I look at it, but don't gather or accumulate it.
No, but for example, if I am learning something new, sir, then of course the learning is happening, which is physiological, factual, actual functional knowledge.
Yeah.
But then there is a psychological accumulation. If it's a good topic, if I'm learning something good, then I'm feeling good. If it's not good, then I'm feeling bored. So all that is also getting accumulated.
Yes. So with that, then you will make a choice that this is I'm not interested, I don't want to learn. This is the thing which, so what you want to learn in the factual is decided by the psychological component. Means I am interested, say, in tennis, I want to play tennis, I want to learn all the techniques and everything. But I am not interested in cricket, so I don't want to learn cricket. So the matter is over there. So what we are saying is that the psychological decides what actual should be there or should not be there.
True, sir. But the learning, whatever has been learned,
yes,
has the psychological component attached to it, isn't it?
Yes.
Because whenever I recall it,
yes, that will be there because I like, say, playing certain game. Then whenever there is an opportunity, I will end up in playing that.
right?
And when I play, I feel nice, I feel good. That's also okay. There is nothing. You see, we are not saying that the psychological response should not be there. We are not saying that. Psychological response will be there. What we are saying is that there is no need to accumulate the psychological response. When you accumulate, then that becomes a problem, because then all the further responses will be as per that accumulation.
Right.
But if there is a psychology, and there has to be a psychological response, because a human being is not just intellectual. The human being is a body, the human being is the thought, the brain, the mind, and the human being is also the emotions, sensations, the heart. So all of that has to happen. You cannot cut off one thing and say, oh, this is psychological and has no place. So we are not saying that. I mean, one has to respond emotionally, one has to respond intellectually, and maybe necessarily one has to respond physically also. Right? But whether there is a harmony among these three, if there is no harmony among the three, then one is in conflict, and then that is going to cause suffering.
One last question.
Yeah, please.
So that is just in follow-up to what he had asked as well. You talked about taking a calculated risk as we move forward. If there is an opportunity or a new job or new thing that's coming up, there are two paths that can go. There is always, the intention is to have movement in life.
Yes.
one path is simpler, where I don't need to do much, things are as easy. The other path leads to more, doing more things. In that doing more things, there is always a possibility of, while I will do my best, there is a possibility of accumulating more psychological content.
Right.
So at that point in time, is it wise not to actually take things up?
No, I mean, if you are in a learning mode, then you will not be afraid to take challenges. Provided with those challenges, there is further unfoldment, further growth of a human being. If his life is enriched by taking the challenge, then one has to take that challenge. Then one cannot avoid. And even if one tries to avoid, the life will keep on bringing the same challenge again and again in the life of that person. So life will not miss that person.
No, so but you said enrich.
Yeah, enrichment.
Now what?
Enrichment means whatever the potential of that person, that potential unfolds, manifests, comes out. It's like flowering. Whatever is potentially there in you, when it flowers, it is manifest. So there is action, there is manifestation, and then with that, all the beauty that goes with that manifestation. So, and they say that the every human being has an infinite potential. That's what Krishna says, and therefore there is no end to this unfoldment or to this flowering.
So in that case, is it reasonable to say that experiential aspect of learning balances out the physiological and psychological content that is built? Because content is built irrespective.
Yes.
There is content.
Yes.
So the experiential, because life is dynamic, it's work in progress, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So does the experiential aspect of learning balance out the physiological and psychological? Is it reasonable to say that?
The experiential aspect of learning
Yeah.
takes care of the factual knowledge, the factual things, but doesn't take care of the psychological aspect.
Yeah, correct.
That is the point. So the factual means that you have a lot of experience in driving, then you will be an excellent driver. You will not make mistakes, and you will. Or if you have a lot of experience in playing certain game, then you know all the tactics, techniques, and then you are not likely to make those mistakes. So the factual will work very fine. I mean, in fact, they say the practice makes the person perfect. So that is really true in the factual case. But the psychological may not work like that. The experience of a psychological event may not enable the person to handle or to avoid or to be free of that psychological event. And Krishnaji gives the example that human beings have been fighting war for the last 5,000 years. They have great experience of war, and still they continue to fight. They have seen all the bad effects of war, the damage to property, loss of life, and even the survivors, they have lost their limbs or lost this or that, and the kind of life they have to live. So all the horrors of war, human beings have experienced, not once, again and again, last 5,000 years. But still, that experience has not changed them or taught them anything. They still continue to fight. And so one can say that, yes, in the psychological realm, the experience doesn't seem to work, doesn't seem to lead to the psychological understanding. Yeah, please, but I think I have answered this question.
Yeah, no, but in some sense, kind of correlated to what you say. So so as you said, experience doesn't necessarily lead to that enrichment or that unfolding. And you said that I think you mentioned it many times, that anything that is helping in this unfoldment is the right action in some sense. That could be a way to determine. But again, it's not clear what action would help in that unfoldment, in the sense of when they're talking about a calculated risk or anything of that kind.
The calculated risk means you have a knowledge base, and based on that you work out how the event is likely to go, in what way, and what are the risk factors, and then what are your provisions to meet those risks. And so with all that you come up with a course of action, right? And then you go ahead with that, and if those points on which you have made provisions, they do take place, then you already have a provision, so you respond to it in that way, and therefore the process goes through. But a calculated risk doesn't mean that you have seen all possibilities. That is impossible to see all the possibilities. So there is always a possibility that something which you have not thought over, unpredictable, may enter or may happen. Now that is where the person has to have a presence of mind. They say that a presence of mind means a capacity to understand the situation as it arises and respond to it adequately. Yeah, appropriately. That is the presence of mind. So for a person who has presence of mind, then for him there is no worry. I mean, he is aware of his capabilities, and he is confident that he will be able to deal with it, whatever way it may happen. So he does that. But a person who doesn't have a presence of mind, right, then he will be in difficulty, because then he won't be able to face that. Then maybe he will have to ask somebody if he is available, and not, then like say in this that tunnel collapse, the expert was brought from here and there, and finally that expert didn't have presence of mind, so got stuck up in that machine, broke up and all those things. And then a very simple kind of technique, you don't even call it as a technique, but a very simple set of actions, because of yes, by the simple presence of mind, just got the thing done. So this is how it happens. So you spend millions of dollars in getting all that machinery and all those things, and finally just a very simple, inexpensive thing save those people.
So this dialogue lasted for more than 2 hours plus.
Oh yes.
20 minutes.
Yeah. So I think time to stop. And
so we'll start now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.